Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about whether or not it's a good idea to share your political beliefs in the classroom. Now, I'm talking specifically here about things like composition classes. If you're teaching a political science class or something like that, the calculus is probably different. If you're teaching a chemistry class or a nursing class or something like this, probably not that crucial a decision to make one way or the other because it's probably not coming up that much. But in composition courses, we do tend to deal a lot with controversial issues, in part because students are just interested in writing about them. And so even if we ourselves are choosing to try not to introduce politically controversial material, students often will. So, the question essentially that I'm dealing with is, as instructors, should we hide our political identities? And I'm using political as a shorthand here for our sort of, not just political in the traditional sense of like, I'm a Democrat, I'm a Republican, I'm an independent, I'm a communist, whatever it is, but political in the sense of our stances on particular issues, but also identity categories, not inherently visible identity categories. Race tends to be visibly coded, gender tends to be visibly coded, things like this. But things like religious identities, which may or may not be overtly expressed. Alignments like being a feminist, for instance, which may or may not be overtly expressed, things like this. Should we bring those into the classroom? I have known people who have been very, very overt about this. I was in my doctoral program with somebody who had a reputation for being a very open about his political opinions. He designed a course around LGBT issues, which isn't, he was a queer theorist. His doctoral dissertation was about queer theory. He himself was a gay man, is a gay man. He still is. He had a reputation for being very overt about his political beliefs. On the other hand, I went in my master's program, I had a friend who would take the cross on her necklace and put it behind her so that it was not visible to her students before she would go into the classroom. Because while her faith was an important part of who she was personally, she didn't want that to be something that her students knew about. It simply, she felt it wasn't relevant to the course. And she felt that if students knew that was a component of her identity, particularly a strong component of her identity, then that would affect the way that her students saw her. So you have this sort of broad range of responses, with these two, I think, sort of being opposite ends of the spectrum in a way. Very overtly political, saying, here is my political beliefs, I am voting for X candidate, and these are important things to me. Versus the person who says, I'm going to tell my students nothing about my personal beliefs, opinions, values, whatever it is, apart from, obviously, composition-related stuff. So, I think everybody more or less falls along this spectrum, and the question is, where do you want to fall and why? And I think there's good arguments for looking for a point somewhere in the middle on this spectrum. That's what I've typically tried to do. I've talked with other people about this, and I've kind of adjusted where I sit on the spectrum. Because for a long time, I sat more toward the I'm not presenting my values or opinions side. But based on some conversations I had this semester, I've shifted more toward the middle. So let's start by talking about costs and benefits of each of these extreme approaches, and then we'll talk about what you might do to sit kind of in the middle and why that might be preferable. So, one of the benefits of the extreme position where you say, here is who I am, here's my political beliefs, my religious beliefs, my cultural values, whatever it is. One of the good things with that is this can model for students particular ways of thinking. Right? Because that's one of the things that we as instructors do, is we're not just here giving knowledge that is objective in itself or something like this. What we are doing is showing students ways of thinking. And you can be very honest and overt about your ways of thinking about the world. And I would say if you do that, you want to interrogate those beliefs and say, not just say, this is what I believe, because it's right, but say, this is what I believe, here is the way that I've come to this conclusion. Because part of the thing we have to do in composition classes is teach students to think logically. Why do I believe the things that I believe? And so you can do that with your own beliefs. I believe this because I have gone through this chain of reasoning. And then what becomes important about that is the model of the chain of reasoning that leads you to a particular conclusion. So that's, I would say, the argument for doing this, is that you are showing students how someone with more experience in education reasons to arrive at a conclusion. On the other hand, you've got the opposite extreme, where you say, I'm telling you nothing about my beliefs, my values, my ideas, whatever it is. The benefit of this is that students are more likely to feel open to express their own ideas, their own methods of reasoning, their own ways of looking at the world, without a concern that you as a Democrat or a Republican or a feminist or whatever it is are going to penalize them for not thinking the way that you think. If they don't know what your positions are, they may be much more open to expressing their own positions and their own arguments without that concern, because that is a very real concern, especially, I would say, for right-wing students. And that's, in many cases, I think, a somewhat artificially stoked fear through things like the professor watch list and bullshit like this. But it is a real fear. And I've had students put that in my evals and things like that they felt that I graded them harsher because I didn't agree with their position. No, I don't. Actually, ironically, I am more likely to grade lightly but comment heavily on papers that I disagree with the arguments, because I am concerned about the natural human inclination to say, I disagree with this, therefore it's bad, and therefore your grade is going to suffer. But I try and grade everything objectively. I try as objectively as is possible with writing. I try and grade everything by the same standard. I'll say that, at least. I'll put it that way. Objective, subjective, I'm not going to argue. But that's that. But that's me, that's not this video. So, there are, however, drawbacks to this. The obvious drawback, I think, of the extreme position of telling your students your positions is that the very opposite of the benefits you get with not telling them things, which is that if I say to you, I am a hardcore Republican and I believe in capitalism, and you're like, well, I'm a hardcore Democrat and I'm anti-capitalist, but now I don't feel like I can say that in class or in my papers. Now I have a problem. One of two things, in my view, is going to happen at that point. Either the student is going to say, okay, I totally disagree with this person. I'm going to shut down in this. I'm not going to participate because I disagree with this person so vehemently. So that's one possibility, is that students just tune out. The other possibility is that students will just lie to you and say the things that they think that you want them to say, whether or not it's what they believe. Now, if you think there's a value to students being honest, then that's a bad thing. If you don't care about students being honest, then, great. Not a problem. But if you think that students actually expressing their genuine beliefs and saying, here's what I think and why, if you think that has positive value in your classroom, then expressing your own political views can stifle that. If students feel like, well, this person believes X, therefore they're going to penalize my grade for expressing Y. So that's one potential problem. We have a similar, I think, issue, ironically enough. There's a risk if you tell your students nothing about you, because then students may just assume things about you. They may assume, and often they will probably make assumptions based on the standard professor. That is the standard professor constructed by the media. So somebody who's left-leaning, somebody maybe who's a cultural Marxist, although that's not really a thing. Somebody who's going to try and indoctrinate them, whatever it is. They may make those assumptions. And in all honesty, you can't stop students making assumptions about you. Sorry, that's where it is. So that's one risk. And they may still try and sort of shape their stances on things based on what they think is going to appeal to you, but without any sort of data to make that assessment. It's going to be whatever they think a professor would prefer. So I think there's some benefits to being in the middle. Now, where I've traditionally been, I've tried to be very politically neutral in class. So typically whenever I give an example that's a politically rooted example, I try and give both an example from the right and the left. So I try and sort of balance things out. I try and be as neutral as I can. I will present some reading assignments that are from right-wing perspectives, some that are from left-wing perspectives, and I try and challenge them. And I typically don't say, here's what I think, here's where I stand on these issues. But I was talking to one of my office mates this past semester, spring 2023, not that that's important for the video, but I was talking to one of my office mates, and what this person said is the benefit of sometimes expressing your own perspective on an issue is that it does model for students how to think, how to reason, what kinds of considerations to bring to the table when deciding where they stand on issues. And so this past semester, actually asked my students a couple of times, are you interested in knowing where I stand on this issue? And I explained to them, typically I don't tell students what I think about these issues. I want to give you the models for reasoning, but let you do your own reasoning. I want to try and minimize how much influence my own perspective has on yours. And I do want to assure you, I don't grade based on your political opinions. So if you hold a different political position than me, which most of you will on one issue or another, that doesn't affect your grade. So I think that disclaimer is very, very important. Whether or not students accept it is a different question. But so we watched, for instance, a debate between Sam Harris and Ben Shapiro about whether or not morality is rooted in religion. And I gave my opinion about the debate because students across all four of my sections I was teaching said, yeah, we're interested in knowing what you think about this and why. And I said, okay, I think Harris won this debate because here's what I see. Here are the problems I see with Harris's argument, so that he's not perfect. But the problems with Shapiro's style, his rhetoric, outweigh, for me, the problems with Harris's argument. And so because I was able to do that analysis, I was able to sort of explain, here's what I think of these two positions and why I think what I think. That modeled for students what kind of reasoning they should be doing when they're assessing things like this, when they're assessing argumentation in this case. So for me, that's sort of the benefit of doing this. Like I wouldn't express my political opinion just for the sake of being able to say, here is my political opinion. For me, the composition classroom is not a space for me to pontificate about my views. It's a space to talk about rhetoric. And in the context of, I can express my opinion about this, it was a rhetorical analysis and evaluation of their argument in the context of me giving my view. So I think if you can take that kind of approach where there is a pedagogical benefit to it, then it's a good thing to do sometimes.